Catch the wave. You're listening to Wave Radio, your home for uplifting gospel music.
You're listening to the Afternoon Praise on this Thrive Thursday. How you doing? How are you doing? We are one day removed from the weekend, and I'm excited. And I know. You're like, hey, man, what happened to you yesterday? Yeah, I wasn't really feeling good yesterday. I wasn't feeling well. So again, I missed yesterday. So please forgive me. But you had a replay of a great show yesterday. But don't worry about yesterday, because God woke you up today. And today is Thrive Thursday here on the Afternoon Praise. And I thank you for joining me, because, it's all about building people. It's all about strengthening leaders and helping you think differently about faith. I want to help you think differently about leadership, business, your life, your family, through timeless wisdom of the Word of God. And this is what the Afternoon Praise is all about. And this week, we've been walking through one of the most remarkable recovery stories in the Bible. Yes, on Monday, we discovered that you can't recover what you won't confront. See, before David ever recovered his family, his city, and his possessions, he had to face the reality of what had happened. Yes. And see, recovery begins with honesty. Yes, it does, people. And on Tuesday, we learned, don't confuse loss with defeat. See, David experienced tremendous loss, but he refused to allow that loss to become his identity. See, loss is an event. Defeat is a decision. And today, on this Thrive Thursday, we're taking it to the next step. And today, we are talking about recovery is an ownership decision. Yes, recovery is. Recovery is an ownership decision. And now, hold on. Before we go any further, let me say something that I believe is important. See, ownership is not the same as blame. And some of you listening today have experienced things you never chose. Some were betrayed, some were abandoned. Some of y'all lost jobs because of someone else's decision. Some receive a diagnosis that you didn't ask for. Some watched their business collapse because the economy changed. See, the Bible never asked us to pretend those things didn't happen. David didn't cause the Amalekites to attack Ziklag. Joseph didn't choose the pit. Job didn't create his suffering. And Jesus didn't deserve the cross. People, life happens. But here's what separates people who remain stuck from people who recover. They eventually ask a different question. Not, why did this happen to me? But, what do I own from this point forward? See, researchers who study resilience have discovered something fascinating. People who constantly recover from adversity don't spend all their energy trying to control what they can't change. They learn to focus on what they can influence next. Excuse me. The psychologist Julian Roeder called this an internal locus of control. Internal locus of control. See, it doesn't ignore reality. It simply refused to surrender the future. And David couldn't change what happened already, but he could decide what happened next. And that's ownership. And that's the decision that changed everything. If you tuned in today, I need for you to go tell a family member and a friend, because we're going to dig in deep and get you the tools and the encouragement you need to go to that next level. Hey, you're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown.
Join us on this heavenly journey, one song at a time, Wave Radio.
You're listening to the Afternoon Praise on this Thrive Thursday, and today we're talking about recovery is an ownership decision. See, one of the greatest misunderstandings about ownership is believing that it means accepting responsibility for everything that has happened to you. It doesn't. See, ownership is not saying everything is my fault. Ownership is saying from this moment forward, I will be responsible for my response. That's a difference, y'all. See, David wasn't responsible for the attack on Ziklag. His city had been burned. His family had been taken captive. The people he had led were so overwhelmed with grief that they talked about killing him. And none of those circumstances were under David's control anymore. But what happened next? And people, it's your next. What happened next was one of the healthiest shifts we can make in life is learning to separate the event from the response. See, the event may belong to yesterday, but the response belongs to today. And see, that's empowering because it reminds us that while we cannot always choose our circumstances, we can choose our character. See, we can choose wisdom, we can choose faith, we can choose integrity, we can choose the next step. And ownership doesn't erase the pain, people. It simply refuses to let pain make every future decision. Hey, you're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown.
You're riding the waves of faith and grace on Wave Radio.
If you just tuned in, you're listening to the Afternoon Praise here on Wave Radio, and we are talking about recovery is an ownership decision. So let's talk about this. So in the Bible says something remarkable before David ever prayed. This is what, listen to this. It said, they wept until they had no more power to weep. See, I love that the Bible includes this detail because we think we can't get emotional. Men think if they cry, they're weak. But guess what? We do get emotional. See, I love that the Bible included this detail because it reminds us that faith isn't pretending everything is okay. Recovery isn't emotional denial. Kingdom people grieve. Kingdom people hurt. Kingdom people cry. And David did. See, his mighty men did. There are seasons when life knocked the wind out of you. Walk up. And ignoring those emotions isn't strength. But living there forever isn't recovery either. And researchers who study emotional resilience consistently find that acknowledging emotions is healthier than suppressing them. And at the same time, healing begins when emotions become information instead of permanent residence. Can I say that again? Healing begins when emotions become information instead of permanent residence. And David allowed himself to grieve, which we should all allow ourselves to grieve. But when he made an ownership decision, the Bible said, David encouraged himself in the Lord his God. And this is the season a lot of us got to get out of what we going through and encourage ourselves to do better. Encourage ourselves to take advantage of the moment so we can make the right decisions for our future. See, notice the word. Notice this. It said, but. See, everything changed after that word. Grief was real, but it wasn't the end. The loss was real, but it wasn't the end. Discouragement was real, but it wasn't the end. Your diagnosis is real, but it's not the end. Your lack of finances is real, but it's not the end. Your addiction, your broken relationships, it is real, but it's not the end. See, ownership often begins with one small word, but. Hey, you're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown.
Stay tuned and stay blessed here on Wave Radio.
If you just tuned in, you're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown. Let's look at the Hebrew word translated encourage is shazak. Shazak. It means much more than giving yourself a motivational speech. It means to strengthen. Shazak. Yes, to strengthen, to repair, to bind together, to restore what has become weak. See, David wasn't trying to convince himself everything would work out. He was rebuilding the one thing recovery depends on: his inner stability. Think about that. Before David recovered his family, he recovered his focus. Before he recovered his possessions, he recovered his perspective. Before he recovered his city, he recovered himself. And psychologist Bandura spent decades researching what he calls self-efficacy. See, the belief that you can successfully take action. One of his greatest discovery was that confidence is built through action. See, we often think confidence comes first. The research says otherwise. See, people become more confident because they take meaningful action. I become confident because I know I can do it. I've been doing it so long. I've been practicing. I've been researching. I can do radio. I'm confident in doing radio. I'm confident in sitting down with somebody, having a discussion about purpose, leadership building, kingdom building, because I do it constantly. And see, David didn't wait until he felt stronger. He strengthened himself. And sometimes the first ownership decision isn't changing your circumstances, it's changing your posture towards your circumstances. And people, Jesus died so that we can be victorious, and we must stand in the posture of victory. See, a lot of us is trying to fight to gain victory, but we must fight from the posture of victory because we are already victorious. Hey, you're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown.
Stay tuned and stay blessed here on Wave Radio.
You're listening to the Afternoon Praise here on Wave Radio, and we are talking about recovery is an ownership decision. See, after strengthening himself, David did something else that great leaders constantly do. He asked for direction. See, the scripture said, and David inquired at the Lord. See, notice what he didn't ask. He didn't ask, why did this happen to me, God? He didn't ask, why me, God? He didn't ask, why didn't you stop this, God? See, instead, David asks, shall I pursue? See, this is one of the greatest ownership questions in scripture. See, ownership changes our questions. So instead of asking who's responsible, ownership asks, what is my next step? Instead of asking what could have been, ownership asks what can still become. See, that's why anxiety often begins to lose its grip when we start taking ownership. Not because every problem disappears, no, but because clarity begins replacing confusion. And David asked for direction. God answered with one word, and that word was pursue. And right now, some of y'all just need to hear that word, pursue. Go get it. Go get it. See, he didn't give David the entire strategy. Now pay attention. He gave him the next step, pursue. And something that's exactly how God works in our life. I mean, sometimes that's how God works in our life. He gives us enough light for the next step, trusting us to walk by faith. Listen to that, by faith, before he reveals the rest. So right now, I'm telling some of you all, if y'all haven't, seek God. And when God tell you to go, go. Don't wait for no more instructions, just go. Hey, you're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown.
Stay tuned and stay blessed here on Wave Radio.
You're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown, on this Triumph. No, it's not Triumph. It is Thrive Thursday. Yes, I got my days mixed up. It is Thrive Thursday, and we are talking about recovery is an ownership decision. See, One of the greatest myths about recovery is believing that one big decision changes everything. See, it usually doesn't, people. Recovery is rarely one dramatic moment. It's a series of ownership decisions made constantly over time. And David didn't strengthen himself and instantly recovered everything. No, he strengthened himself. He sought God's direction. He organized his men. He began to pursue. He cared for the Egyptian servant that they found along the way. He fought, then he recovered everything. See, notice the pattern. Recovery wasn't built on one miracle. It was built on one wise decision after another. And researchers who study high performers have found something similar. Lasting success is rarely the result of one extraordinary act. It is usually the result of consistent decisions, repeated over time. And small decisions compound just like small investments. That should encourage somebody today. See, maybe you don't need one giant breakthrough. Maybe today's ownership decision is enough. Make the phone call, start the plan, have the conversation. Or better less, forgive. Apply. Study, people. Or just save. Pray. Whatever it is. Every healthy decision becomes part of your recovery. God doesn't always ask you to leap. Sometimes he simply asks you to keep taking the next faithful step. Hey, you're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown.
Stay tuned and stay blessed here on Wave Radio.
If you just tuned in, you're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown, and this is Thrive Thursday. And we are talking about recovery as an ownership decision. See, one of the most dangerous places a person can live is in the belief that nothing they do matters anymore. Yes. See, this is called learned helplessness. Excuse me, y'all. See, research show that after repeated disappointments, people can begin believing they have no influence over their future, even when opportunities are standing right in front of them. See, think about how dangerous that mindset is. The opportunity changes, the environment changes, the people change. But because the mind has been trained by past disappointments, the person never moves. See, the prison is no longer around them, it's inside them. See, again, David refused to let Ziklag train his future. He had every reason to stop believing, people. Every reason to quit. Every reason to conclude that God had abandoned him. But instead, he strengthened himself. He sought God and he kept moving. See, one painful season should never become the teacher of every future season. Don't let yesterday convince you that tomorrow has already been decided. No. God is still writing. God is still opening doors. God is still positioning people. And he is still calling you to move forward. We have to lose some things to gain some things. So again, don't allow one season to define your future. Hey, you're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown.
Bringing the sounds of heaven 24/7, Wave Radio.
You're listening to the Afternoon Praise here on Wave Radio, and we are talking about recovery is an ownership decision. Yes, you have to decide that you want to recover. You have to own this. You have to own this. And here's something I find fascinating. And I know you'll be like, man, he digging David in the ground. I am, because this is a great example. This story was a great example of recovery. See, after David strengthened himself, he didn't immediately started running. He paused. He paused long enough to seek wisdom from God, not from his wife, not from his men, You know, I was going to say his husband. He ain't got no husband. But what I'm saying is you got to seek God. You know, yeah, sometimes you talk to your wife, you talk to your husband, you talk to your friends, but you got to seek God first. It said, first, seek ye first the kingdom of God and all its righteousness. And all these things will be added. And guess what will be added? The person who you should talk to next outside of God. You know, I get it. I'm like that. We always want to talk to somebody about something, but the first person should be God. And that's what David did. David paused long enough to seek wisdom. See, ownership is not reckless, people. Ownership is thoughtful. There's a difference between movement and meaningful movement. And sometimes people hear messages about taking action and assume that means acting quickly. And not necessarily. David asked God, shall I pursue? That question teaches us something powerful. Ownership doesn't mean believing you have all the answers. No. Ownership means being responsible enough to seek the right answer. And research on executive decision making consistently show that high performing leaders don't make fewer decisions because they are afraid. They make better decisions because they gather the right information before they act. So it's not about making fewer decisions, it's about making the right decisions. And wisdom slows down just enough to move in the right direction. Can I say that again? Wisdom, the right knowledge, slows down just enough to move in the right direction. See, there are seasons when our greatest ownership decisions isn't moving faster. It's asking better questions. See, God honors people who seek wisdom before they seek speed. Hey, you're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown.
Catch the wave. You're listening to Wave Radio, your home for uplifting gospel music.
You're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown. Let's talk about God's answer to David was surprisingly simple. See, we will probably think, hey, David, go gather all 10,000 men, go grab these swords, these weapons, and you will go get your stuff. No, God said, pursue. That's how simple it was. Pursue. That's it. No map, no timeline, no explanation of how everything would unfold. Just pursue. And see, some of us are looking for a dictionary of ways how to move forward. But you only need one simple word, and that's pursue. See, sometimes we delay our recovery because we're waiting for God to explain every detail. We want next month before we finish today. We want certainty before obedience. But throughout Scripture, God often reveals direction one step at a time. See, let's look at Abraham. Abraham was told to go before he knew the destination. Noah built before it even rained. Joshua stepped into the Jordan before the water moved. See, and David pursued before he knew exactly how recovery would happen. Faith has always been comfortable taking the next step without demanding the entire blueprint. Can I say that again? Faith has always been comfortable. Faith has been comfortable taking the next step without demanding the entire blueprint. So you must get comfortable in your faith. You must get comfortable in faith. Because you're not going to always have the whole blueprint before you should move and walk in faith. And see, ownership asks this: what has God already told me to do? Not what else do I need to know? See, maybe today's breakthrough isn't hidden in new information. Maybe it's hidden in your willingness to obey the information you already have. See, because clarity often grows while we're moving, not while we are standing still. Hey, you're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown.
Catch the wave. You're listening to Wave Radio, your home for uplifting gospel music.
If you just tuned in on this Thrive Thursday, you're listening to the Afternoon Praise. And if you miss any part of this show, you can go back to my YouTube channel, Understanding the Play, and watch the show entirety at the 6:15 or any other show that you missed. You can go back and listen to it now. Not now. Finish listening to this show, but you can go back and listen to those shows anytime you want to. And again, you don't have to listen to it on my YouTube channel. You can listen to the replay of the show on any podcast platform that you use, being from Pandora, being from Apple Podcasts, being from Amazon, being from TuneIn. Wherever you listen to your podcast, you can listen to the replay. All right. So let's talk about some things change the moment David makes an ownership decision. Yes, some things. And I'm saying some things because I'm trying to tell you some things, and I put you in David's spot. Some things would change the moment you make an ownership decision. So just replace yourself with David. So something did change the moment David made an ownership decision. The atmosphere changed. See, think about that. Just a few verses earlier, his own men were talking about stoning him. Now those same men are preparing to follow him into battle. You got to ask yourself, what changed? I'll tell you what changed. It was the position David put himself in. See, the circumstances hadn't changed. The city was still burned. The families were still gone. Nothing external had improved. The leader changed. David changed. He encouraged himself. He didn't allow the voices around him to get to him. Oh, we're going to stone you. Oh, man, you shouldn't have did it. David didn't allow those voices to get to him. And he didn't allow his self to get caught up in what happened. And one of the greatest responsibilities we carry is realizing that our attitude is rarely private. And see, people think, you're going to look a certain way, you're going to carry yourself a certain way. Then you get mad when people ask, what's wrong? What's going on? Nothing. No, it is something, because you cannot hide your attitude. Your attitude is not a private thing. See, researchers in organization psychology have long observed what they call emotional contagion. See, emotions spread through groups. Calm spread, fear spreads, hope spreads, and panic spreads. But people often take emotional cues from the person they trust to lead. And see, David understood something many people miss. Before he could stabilize the group, he had to stabilize himself. And see, that's true in our homes, people, our business, our ministries, our friendships. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give the people around you is not having every answer. I'm going to say that again. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give the people around you is not having every answer. It's having enough stability that they can borrow your hope until they find their own. And ownership begins with you, but it never ends with you. Hey, you're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown.
Catch the wave. You're listening to Wave Radio, your home for uplifting gospel music.
You're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown. And today we're talking about recovery is an ownership decision. See, here's another lesson from Ziklag that speaks directly to the way we build our lives. See, ownership creates credibility. People don't follow perfection, they follow consistency. And one of the reasons David's men followed him again wasn't because he never made mistakes. It was because they had watched him constantly seek God, make decisions, and lead with integrity. See, trust is rarely built through one spectacular moment. Trust compounds. See, behavioral scientists describe trust as something built through repeated, predictable actions. And every kept promise, every honest conversation, every responsible decision becomes evidence that people can depend on you. And the same principle applies to your personal brand. Your reputation isn't built by your best day. It's built by your consistent days. See, every ownership decision become another brick in the foundation of your credibility. That's why recovery is also about rebuilding trust. Trusting yourself, trust with your family, trust with your customers, trust with your team. Every decision say, this is whom I am becoming. You're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown.
Catch the wave. You're listening to Wave Radio, your home for uplifting gospel music.
If you just tuned in, you're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown. Let's look at one of my favorite business stories comes from Ford Motor Company. See, when the CEO, Alan Mulally, that the company wasn't just struggling financially. It had a real bad problem. And leaders were hiding behind news because they feared being blamed. See, every report was green. Everything looked successful, except the company was losing billions of dollars. Then something remarkable happened. One executive finally admitted that one of his projects was in trouble. So instead of criticizing him, Mulally applauded him. Why? Because ownership had finally entered the room. From the point forward, people stopped protecting their image and started solving problems together. See, that's an incredible leadership lesson. See, ownership creates environments where trust can exist. Blame creates environments where people hide. And the same thing happens in families, marriages, churches, businesses, and communities. See, when people know they'll be punished for honesty, they hide problems. And when people know honesty leads to solution, healing begins. David never hid the crisis. He faced it. Ownership doesn't make you weaker. It makes progress possible. Hey, you're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown.
Catch the wave. You're listening to Wave Radio, your home for uplifting gospel music.
You're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown. Let's start to bring this home. See, every one of us is building something. We're building a family, a career, ministry, business, a legacy. See, the question isn't whether you're building. The question is what kind of builder you're becoming. And see, researchers studying psychological ownership discovered something fascinating. See, when people begin seeing something as ours instead of theirs, commitment increases. See, creativity increases. Responsibility increases. See, stewardship improves. Think about the spirituality. God has entrusted each of us with something. Our gifts, our influence, our relationships, our opportunities. And stewardship begins when we stop asking, whose responsibility is this? And start asking, what has God placed in my hands to build? And David didn't own everything that happened, but he owned what God placed in front of him. And that's the heart of stewardship. Ownership isn't about controlling everything, people. It's about faithfully managing what God has entrusted to you today. And when we begin living that way, recovery stops being something we are waiting for. It becomes something we actually start building. And like today's title, recovery is an ownership decision. Hey, you're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown.
Catch the wave. You're listening to Wave Radio, your home for uplifting gospel music.
If you just tuned in, you're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown. And let's talk about our title today is Recovery is an Ownership Decision. See, One of the greatest freedoms ownership gives us is this. It gives us permission to stop waiting. See, there are people listening today who have been waiting for the perfect opportunity, waiting for someone to apologize, waiting for the economy to improve. But people, you got to stop waiting. You got to stop waiting for the right relationships. You got to stop waiting until you feel more confidence. Or people, you got to stop waiting until you have more money or more time. See, the problem with waiting is that it often disguises itself as wisdom. And sometimes waiting is exactly what God requires. Other times, waiting becomes fear wearing a different name. See, David didn't wait for his emotions to improve. He didn't wait for an anonymous support. He didn't wait for every question to be answered. Once God said pursue, David moved. See, ownership recognizes the difference between preparation and procrastination. And a lot of us procrastinate. I was a procrastinator. I was a heavy procrastinator, thinking I need to research more. I need to get this person. I need to sit at this person's table because this thing will make it better. No, pursue. Preparation and procrastination ain't the same. See, preparation equips you. Procrastination delays you. One moves you forward and towards recovery, and the other keeps your recovery on hold. And ask yourself today, is there something I've been calling procrastination that is really fear? Because recovery often begins the moment we stop waiting for perfect conditions and become faithful with today's opportunity. Hey, you're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown.
Catch the wave. You're listening to Wave Radio, your home for uplifting gospel music.
Hey, you're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown. Let me tell you something. Can I tell you something, people? If nobody never told you this, let me tell you. Recovery isn't built on one extraordinary moment. It's built through ordinary decisions made constantly. See, Monday, David confronted reality. Tuesday, David refused to become what he lost. And today, David owned his next step. See, that's the pattern. You see the pattern? That's the pattern every one of us can follow. And researchers call it behavioral momentum. Small, repeated actions create larger patterns over time. See, the kingdom has already worked that way. See, the kingdom has always worked that way. And Jesus said it, if you're faithful over a few things, you'll be trusted with many. Recovery doesn't usually begin with giant victories. It begins with faithful stewardship. One honest conversation, one wise decision, one prayer, one application, one budget, that one phone call you've been putting off, one act of forgiveness because you don't want to forgive someone, or that one act of obedience. Never underestimate what God can build through one faithful decision repeated over time. Hey, you're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown.
Catch the wave. You're listening to Wave Radio, your home for uplifting gospel music.
Hey, you're tuned in to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown. Let's before we close this day out, right? You know, it's not time yet. It's not time. But before we close this day out, I want to leave you with one thought that has stayed with me all week. David never recovered because he was the strongest man. And I'm talking to you, woman, but we're talking about David. He's a man. But David didn't recover because he was the strongest man. You're not going to recover because you're the strongest person. He recovered because he remained available to God. And that's how you are going to recover. You have to remain available to God. Think about that. There were warriors stronger than David. There were kings with larger armies. There were leaders with greater resources. But David possessed something priceless, a heart that remained teachable, a spirit willing to seek God, humility that keep asking, Lord, what do you want me to do? And that's ownership, people. You must take that same posture. And see, ownership says, I don't know everything, but I'm willing to learn. I haven't arrived, but I'm willing to grow. I can't change yesterday, but I can honor God with today. That's the kind of heart God can continue building with. Because kingdom builders never graduate from being students. They stay teachable, they stay humble, and they stay available. Hey, you're listening to the Afternoon Praise. I'm your host, Demetrius L. Brown.
Catch the wave. You're listening to Wave Radio, your home for uplifting gospel music.
You're listening to the Afternoon Praise on this Thrive Thursday, and we are talking about recovery is an ownership decision. But guess what? My time is up, and it's been great. It's been lovely. But before I leave you, I just want to say, let's go back to where this week began. On Monday, we learned that you can't recover what you won't confront. And on Tuesday, we discovered that the loss and defeat are not the same thing. Loss is an action. Defeat is a decision. And today, we've learned that recovery is an ownership decision. Not because life is always fair. No. Not because every circumstance is within control. No. But because God has given every one of us the ability to choose our next response. He didn't just give David. He just didn't give Moses. He didn't just give Joseph. He gave every one of us. He gave you, and you, and you, and you the ability to choose our next response. See, David couldn't erase the ashes. He couldn't undo the attack. He couldn't recover his family by wishing harder. I wish. But he could strengthen himself. He could seek God. He could decide to pursue. And that decision changed everything. And maybe that's where someone listening needs to begin today. Not with a 5-year plan, not with all the answer, just one ownership decision, one prayer, one conversation, one act of obedience, one step. Because again, I'm gonna say this, recovery doesn't begin with everything changes around you. Recovery begins when something changes within you. And that's why ownership isn't a burden, it's a gift. It reminds us that with God's wisdom, his strength, and his direction, listen to what I'm saying. God's wisdom, God's strength, God's direction, not ours, not our family members, not our husbands, no, God's. Our next decision can become the beginning of a brand new chapter. See, we'll continue this journey tomorrow on Fearless Faith Friday. You know, we will discover why the next step is more important than the entire plan on tomorrow, Fearless Faith Friday. But until then, remember, recovery starts with you. I am out of here. Peace. And hold on. Let me say before I say peace. I'm gonna say peace again though. Before I say peace, if you miss any of this show, you can go back and listen to the show entirety on my podcast channel, YouTube, Understanding the Play, or any platform you get your podcast. Now I'm gonna say peace.
Stay tuned and stay blessed here on Wave Radio.